Oh, good morning and welcome back to the table. It's morning for us. Maybe it is for you when you're watching this. Maybe it's later in the day, but it's just kind of an ordinary Wednesday for us. And we're in a pretty ordinary, plain Jane kind of place for now. But I do remember that you are anything but ordinary, which is a claim that I have for you, as well as a title for this series. We're going through the life and call of Moses. We'll spend some more time over the next few weeks unpacking that. We started this last week in a conversation with Ruth about neighbors and being friendly and learning to engage, encourage, reaching out to people maybe you don't know, and also the call this past Sunday, the call that God has on your life, what that looks like. That's not an ordinary thing either.
But you know, Stefan, I have a hard time seeing myself as anything but ordinary. I mean, that is a, you know, I mean, it's just for me, it's, and I don't think I'm by myself. I would think that most of us just see ourselves, we're just ordinary people walking through life. Most of us trying to make a living, raise our kids right.
Yeah.
Maybe do a couple of neat things, but no, I don't have any special gifts, special talents. So my life is just kind of ordinary. Well, what moves us out of that? What pushes us past that? I mean, you know, just like this is just just a plain field.
I think you're selling yourself short, and I think most of us sell ourselves short when we think about our ordinariness of life, our plain Janeness. Yeah, the mass majority of us don't have that one high acclaim of fame or wealth or whatever that thing is, but I think there is some extraordinariness about us. I'll start by saying that being made in the image of God, that little space right there.
That's a good starting point, isn't it?
It's a good starting point. And so for all of us to understand that we are made in the image of God in a way that we resemble God in the world, we have an opportunity to resemble God in the world and to share with other people, but also that God was so particular with each and every one of us to make us unique and special and wonderful. And I guess maybe it's a little bit of our life journey to unpack that and to discover that about ourselves. Yes, we are ordinary in a way.
Yeah.
We're all ordinary people. And our ordinariness of God's nature of working in us is an extraordinary thing. I mean, I think about the stories of like Jesus walking through scriptures in the Gospels, and we get to the ordinariness of fish and bread. And then the extraordinary gift that it becomes a multitude, a feast for a multitude.
Yeah.
I think about those ordinary moments of Jesus having lunch with people or dinner or breakfast, and the extraordinary transformation of life that comes from a simple conversation. I really think that ordinary life that we move through can lead to extraordinary God moments.
You know, when you said that, one thing that came to my mind was where I grew up. Around the corner on the next street over from our house. And I may have used this for you Front Street folks before, but was Mrs. Bostwick. Mm. And I mowed Mrs. Bostwick's yard when I could do that. My dad made me do it. Mom and dad. I mean, it was, you're going to mow Mrs. Bostwick's yard. So she was a widower and sweet, sweet lady. But in my mind, as a 12, 13, 14-year-old, however I was, she wasn't extraordinary until I started mowing her grass. Mm. And as I mowed her grass, caveat, my dad and mom said, you will not take any pay from her.
Right.
Period. And evidently they had told her the same.
So then you were an ordinarily angsty preteen at that point.
Irritable, angry about doing it all.
Yes.
Until I finished that yard and she had me come in the house and she gave me an ice cold bottle of Coke, and the house smelled so good. She had baked bread. Ooh. And she gave me 2 loaves of bread, but before it, she made me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on fresh made bread that was still warm. Mm. As far as I'm concerned, she and God were on the same level. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, I experienced a divine intersection there as a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, that this ordinary plain
Yeah.
widowed woman literally for me just became a gift. And I mean, literally from that on, you can ask my mama to this day, I never, ever, ever, ever complained
Yeah.
about mowing Miss Bostwick's yard because I knew I was going to have a Coke and some bread.
Well, aside from the extraordinariness that you experienced from that, it's a bit pervasive because I've heard that story, I think 3 or 4 times now. And
Probably.
I'm not saying that you overshare.
Yeah, you are, but that's okay.
But what I am saying is that was such an ordinarily
Profound.
perfect, profound moment for you in your life.
Can't shake it.
Yes, it's pushed past into your life in an extraordinary way.
Yeah.
It's taught you how to engage with others. It has inspired you to give in a free, giving, and loving way towards others.
It was a marker.
Change.
It's a marker in your life.
Yeah, I was going to ask if Miss Bosnick's house looked anything simple and plain like this one. Maybe a little
simple,
bit modern.
but it was modern,
Yeah.
simple, but not like a farmhouse.
Okay.
This is a simple farmhouse.
It sure is.
Over 100 years old.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And
Whose house is it?
this was a guy by the name of Washington Dukes.
I've heard that last name before.
Yes. Washington Duke was a tenant farmer in the 1800s, and he married a woman, and at her father's death, he left her, and thus Washington Duke, 76 acres in what is now Durham.
Okay.
But Washington Duke grew up as a tenant farmer near Bahama, which is north of here.
Yeah.
And so he built this house for he and his wife. And before they could move in, and the house was totally completed, his wife died.
Wow.
And taking care of their son, they contracted typhoid fever, and both of them died within 10 days of one another.
Wow.
So tragedy, horrible tragedy. Well, a couple of years later, he was at a Methodist revival, and there he met a young woman and married her, and about the time he married her, the house was finished, so they moved here, and they had 3 more children. But Washington Duke, the Dukes, there is an unbelievable history and sad history and horrible history all at the same time. In that, you folks know, their industry is based on tobacco, which is a horrible product. But back in the day when they do it, they actually thought it was almost medicinal. It was good for you.
Right.
They didn't know that. And
Native Americans have been using tobacco in medicine and other products for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a pretty ordinary thing for them.
It was. As we were talking earlier, smoking tobacco back then was kind of like having a breath mint or chewing gum. Yeah. So so you have to put that in that caveat kind of place. But then the myth is that accidentally a rented slave, I didn't even know you could do that. People would rent slaves if they couldn't own them from other landowners. And that's another particular part of it that's really a horrible part of the history.
Yeah, we can't overlook that.
Absolutely
it is
not.
a part of the history.
And it's just bad. But the myth is this rented slave was in the tobacco barn, and as they were curing the tobacco, and he let the flame go out. He went to sleep.
And so normally you'd have a constant heat going to dry out the leaves.
Yeah. It really was an art form because you had to know the temperature. They didn't have all the things that we have today.
Right.
And so he went to sleep, the fire went out, and then he built the fire back quickly, and it got overheated. And when overheated, it cured this tobacco in a certain way that they eventually became known as bright leaf tobacco because it turned a bright yellow color and created a different flavor. And so that was accidental. Well, Mr. Washington started producing this stuff and built more tobacco barns and this sort of thing. And he expanded his 76 acres to 300 acres.
Okay.
Well, and then he had sons who really made it into something unbelievable.
So a building like this would have been
just like this.
A smoker, a curing room, a curing barn for tobacco.
Barn. Yeah, it was a curing barn. And some of our folks listening, I guarantee you, have actually hung tobacco in some of these places. You climb up in the top and have tobacco sticks and tie the tobacco down, it will hang down, and there was a fire built in the bottom that kept that place heated.
Wow.
Now, why do we tell that story? Why is that important for today?
Well, you kind of look at this little plot of land here, and
Beautiful.
there's 4 or 5 small buildings, very meager buildings, very small, kind of rustic,
The
made
house,
wood and clay.
the house maybe 1,500 square feet, maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
And to imagine that this is the start of Duke. And now when I say Duke, it's not just Washington Duke, it's the family history that goes all the way up until
James
we get
Buchanan,
to what we have
Mary
as Duke
Brittle.
today.
Yeah, right.
Which is Duke University, which is Duke Energy, which is Duke Memorial, United Methodist Church,
Duke Medical Center,
Duke Medical Center.
Duke Power.
Yeah.
You know, and who would have thought that out of these humble kind of the ordinary,
Yeah.
and you know, it turned into this unbelievable thing. Part of the reason I believe that it became what it did was because Washington Duke and his children were potent Methodists.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, to the point that when they gave the money for Duke University to be established, they said the highest point on the campus must be the chapel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no other building can be taller than the chapel in our praise to God. My gut is that Durham, North Carolina, the companies that surround it would not have been, I would guess, even a place like Research Triangle Park may not have been present if it wasn't for the capital, the resources, the great intellectual minds of a place called Duke.
So let me start back a couple thousand years ago.
Just a
6 or
couple of years
7
back,
thousand.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Just a couple of years ago, with Moses. Moses is a fairly ordinary shepherd at this time as he's tending a flock of sheep. And eventually, over 40 years, he sees this bush that's on fire.
Yeah.
And as he moves towards this bush, he hears a voice calling his name.
The boy speaks.
Moses. Yeah. The bush speaks.
Yeah.
Yes. And he hears the voice of God who says, "Don't come any closer. Take off your shoes. This is holy ground." And he does, and he begins to listen to this voice, and he hears this calling. Now, he pushes against this calling a lot, which is what a lot of us are wanting to do when God's calling us to do something. But he finally accepts this calling and leads the Israelites out of Egypt. Okay, so the repeatableness of this story is that you have an ordinary person like Moses who hears this extraordinary call and decides to follow it and becomes this prolific prophet throughout history.
There's no doubt in my mind that Miss Bostic would have never, ever, ever in a million years thought there'd be some short, fat, bald-headed guy in Durham, North Carolina that would be telling her story 50 years later of how she impacted my life. That I've told that story all my life, all my adult life. That was a foundational point of ordinary act of love and kindness that changes trajectories, that changes the world in a person's life.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. Ordinary things that impact and change and mark our lives.
Yeah.
And we all play a part in that. And we never know how that is going to impact someone's life. Again, Miss Bostic didn't even give a thought to making bread and handing me a Coke and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that was warm out of the oven. But I'll never forget it to my dying day. And also my boys will never forget it because they've heard it so many times, they can tell it better than I can.
Yeah.
And they can add some more things to it that didn't happen, but are way interesting.
Yeah.
But they become bigger, they become wonderful, they become foundational, they become markers, they write our story.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I think we want people to see in that burning bush story. Moses, there's really no rhyme or reason other than God's activity in his life, God's activity in Miss Bostic's life, that those lives should have had an impact.
Yeah.
But they did.
Oh, I think this is beautiful. And even though your story may not end up in the world's picture of what extraordinary looks like to be an industry that changes the world in some fantastical way like these that we've heard of today, it does, like yours and like hopefully mine and others, is extraordinary in the sense that it's part of God's story.
Yeah.
And if it changes a single life and that single life is yours,
That's right.
it's extraordinary all on its own. Thank you so much for being with us today. We hope that this is an inspiration to you. Hope that you'll like and share this video and share it with somebody else that maybe needs a little bit of pick-me-up, that their life, even though it's ordinary, is leading to something extraordinary, that they're valuable. Hope that you'll come and visit us on Front Street someday if you're able to, or join us online for worship. Otherwise, we'll be here next week having some more conversations about you, anything but ordinary. See you next week.